The number one purchase item on SNAP is soda, and nearly a quarter of all SNAP benefits goes to purchasing junk food. Do you support any kind of restrictions on SNAP benefits like those?
I recognize that there is food insecurity, and it is more pervasive, I think, than most people realize. I actually got an email yesterday from a local food bank, and we're looking at 1 out of 5 kids in the Pittsburgh region that's food insecure. We've got a very sad situation. Now, what do you do about it? So, there's SNAP dollars, of course, that come in. And the SNAP dollars are only going to go so far, right? So you are going to get, the population that's reliant on that, they're going to be buying the ultra-processed foods. They're going to be buying sodas. They're going to be buying things that they can get with those SNAP dollars. That makes sense because they're not going to buy organic produce because it's ridiculously expensive. Like, we're paying more to not be poisoned.
You've entered the smoke-filled room, where we cut through the haze of Harrisburg politics and get to examine the laws and lawmakers that really drive the discussion.
So in 1905, journalist and devout socialist Upton Sinclair released a novel called The Jungle, which the point of it was to shine a light on the harsh working conditions in America's post-industrial revolution food processing industry. Instead, what it ended up doing is it showed Americans the unsanitary conditions in those food industries, and it eventually led to the great Republican president Theodore Roosevelt to pass the U.S. Pure Food and Drug Act, which established an early version of what we know as today, the FDA. That act passed with only 17 members of Congress voting against it, all of which were Democrat. Fast forward to today, we kind of see history repeating itself, where we have lifelong Democrat RFK Jr., nephew of Democrat President JFK, who has spent his entire life trying to be an advocate for people who are being poisoned by big food and pharmaceutical companies. And we see him being brought on board by Republican President Donald Trump. And now the Democrats are kind of turning on him as well, and we see history once again repeating itself. However, here in Pennsylvania, we see those national political theatrics kind of taking a back seat. How were you able to do that?
So a lot to unpack there. First of all, great novel. Recommended it as a read for anybody and everybody. And we unfortunately still have some of those very unsanitary conditions that still exist today in specifically some of the meatpacking industries and some of the food processing industries that we have here in the United States. As far as the bipartisan approach to food safety, I have found that, and I had been working on some bills in this realm both before RFK was running for president and after. And we know that he's created this MAHA movement, especially amongst Republican voters. And I will say that the bipartisan nature of this effort existed both pre-MAHA and post-MAHA, and actually very little changed with that introduction. I am grateful that he did come on scene and make it a mainstream topic because I don't think it was on a lot of people's minds. Now, colleagues that I've spoken to here in Pennsylvania, there were some that had been aware for personal reasons, or maybe one of their family members had an issue with a certain ingredient. And once you start to peel back the onion on ingredients, you kind of fall down into this rabbit hole that overtakes your life very quickly, as it has mine. And that was really why I started working on the bills. Food affects all of us. Like, it's something that you can't get away from. You have to eat to survive. You're going to feed your family. You're going to eat multiple times a day. So unlike a lot of the legislation that we work on here, not to say that things are less important, but this is something that touches each and every one of us every single day, multiple times a day. And it's a big decision for you to make. What are you going to feed your family? What are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to create a healthy lifestyle? So I think that it was not a surprise that it was bipartisan. And when I set out, I didn't set out necessarily to just get Republicans or just get Democrats or to target certain people that were in the middle. We had people from both sides of the aisle, as far apart as they could be on their vision for the Commonwealth. and all came together on this issue. So I think that speaks volumes about its importance.
Awesome. Well, Representative Natalie Mihalek, thank you so much for joining us today. You represent the 40th Legislative District, which is parts of Allegheny and Washington counties, or for most people in the Commonwealth, southern Pittsburgh. Tell me about your district. Who are your constituents?
So it's the South Hills of Pittsburgh. I represent Bethel Park, which is in Allegheny County, Upper St. Clair, also Allegheny County, and I have Peters Township in Washington County, which is where I reside with my family. The district looked a little bit different up until redistricting a few years ago. I still had the same 3 communities. It was just a little different spread. I had only half of Bethel Park, which is about 35,000 residents. Now I represent all of those residents and only about half of Upper St. Clair. So it's 3 suburban districts just south of Pittsburgh. We have 3 really great school districts. They're constantly, in the news as being rated, top school districts in Pennsylvania, top school districts in the Pittsburgh area. So we're grateful for our, very strong public education system. There are also many other private schools in the area as well that provide a quality education to residents of the 40th district and beyond. What else did you ask me?
Or who are your constituents, or what's important to them?
Okay.
What issues are they facing?
And, my constituents are hardworking people. We have the natural gas industry, of course, proximate to us in Washington County. So we do have a lot of employees from the natural gas industry. We've got a lot of white collar, a lot of University of Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, either employees, students, things like that. So we've got a pretty diverse district, hardworking people, and I'm grateful to represent all 65,000 of them every single day.
Is that where you grew up?
It's not where I grew up. I grew up about a half an hour from my current district. I grew up in Allegheny County, east of Allegheny County. Went to South Allegheny High School, Portview. It's in the McKeesport area for those of you familiar with the Pittsburgh region.
Is that more of a rural area, suburban?
No, it's suburban. Okay. It's a little different from the district that I represent now. The district that we're in now, higher income, higher education. It was a little different, growing up. I grew up in the 80s. We had, just seen the steel industry move away from the Pittsburgh region, and that was really that's really who employed the bulk of the, people where I grew up. So almost everyone in my family, and at least, everyone that I knew had some touch point to the steel industry at one point in time. Of course, there's still, a small remaining plant that was just acquired by Nippon Steel a few months ago. But I think it's only about 3,000 people right now, and it used to be a lot different. It was, McKeesport was a very vibrant community. I remember the streetcar and all of the stores when I was a kid, and that was being supported by these, the steel industry. And when that left, a lot of the, businesses also dried up, people moved away. And it changed in the last 40 years a lot.
So after you graduated high school, you went into the United States Navy, and you qualified for their elite nuclear power program, which, if that's not impressive by itself, only 1% of those who are admitted into that program are women. What was it like being thrown from being just a normal high school student to being thrown into such a high-level environment where I'm sure often at times you were the only woman in the room?
All the time, yes. So I knew that I wanted to serve pretty early on. I had actually been in the delayed entry program all throughout my senior year of high school. So while my enlistment date is just a few days after graduation, I had to give my mom enough time to do graduation party, proper send-off. I knew I was going in at least a year or more before that. So I had kind of prepared myself mentally and physically in that year, just, knowing that it was going to be unknown. It was going to be this, very different life from what I was used to. I mean, it was, my enlistment was actually just a few days after I turned 18. So I was a young kid, knew I wanted to serve, felt the Navy was the right choice for me. I was originally supposed to do something with computers, some computer science job, and when I got to boot camp, I was whisked away to a room to take some tests, and I took this test. I guess it was the test to qualify for the nuclear power program. I did well on it, and I was told, "Oh, your orders are being changed. Computers are out. Nuclear's in." And it was, just one of those things. So anybody listening that's been part of the military or been part of the government, you understand. You just kind of do what you're told sometimes, and you don't question it. And certainly, you're not able to ask those questions in boot camp because it's boot camp, and you're absolutely going to do what you're told, or it's going to be a very unfun day for you, and many push-ups will be involved, I'm sure. But it was fascinating experience, really, to learn what powers our ships, what powers our nuclear navy, and each individual aspect of that. I was a machinist mate. And so you have to be traditionally trained either as a machinist mate. You could also go into electronics. So those are jobs that can occur on a non-nuclear ship. And then the nuclear training is secondary. But I really, I didn't come from a mechanical background. My dad wasn't particularly handy. Sorry, Dad, if you're watching. I don't know that. He's a painter. He's an industrial painter. But as far as mechanics and fixing things, that is just not his strong suit. I know there are a lot of memes out there just saying like, "Oh, I survived holding the flashlight for my dad while he was fixing the car. I can survive anything." It really wasn't one of those situations. He wasn't really fixing much. So I didn't have that mechanical background going in. So I really had to work hard to make it through that, at least that part of school. When I got to the nuclear portion, that stuff clicked a lot easier for me. It was a lot of chemistry, math, physics. I did better at that than I did just the regular.
Might be one of the very few
regular
people
mechanics.
who can say that.
Well, it was funny because as the only female in my class, and most of the men were coming in, they at least had some basic knowledge how to fix. How to change oil in a car, something like that, where I'm like, I didn't even know you changed oil in a car. I mean, that was really where I was coming from. And, they all did well without studying. And I was the one like in school every night, putting the extra hours in. Everything was classified, so you had to study at the building. And when we got onto the nuclear part, I didn't have to spend as much time there, and they all were, and I was just able to go off and do my own thing. So it was definitely interesting, and definitely prepared me for, I think everything that came after. So working in the DA's office, where you're dealing with a lot of male cops and male judges and other male attorneys, and then serving in the legislature, it helped me develop a really thick skin, and just being able to work around some of the issues that are still unfortunately present in the workplace between men and women.
So what made you want to go into the military? I know you said that you knew that's what you wanted to do. Why?
I knew I wanted to serve. My grandfather was in the Marines. My other grandfather was in the Army. Both had vastly different experiences. My grandfather, who was in the Army, was in Korea, and my Marine grandfather served in World War II in the Pacific Theater. So vastly different experiences. But joining the Navy, I felt that I wanted to serve, and I also knew that I needed a way to pay for college, and that offered me both.
Gotcha. So you did eventually go to law school then after leaving the Navy. What made you want to do law school?
So I studied political science when I was an undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh. And like all poli-sci majors, you get to the end of your college career and you think, what on earth am I going to do with this poli-sci degree? Yep. So anyone watching that's considering a degree in political science, make sure you have a job lined up first, or at least some clear path for your career, because I honestly just got to a point where I didn't know what I was going to do, and law school seemed like the best option to continue the education and then to actually have a career at the end of all this schooling.
In college, I often joked around and said, I'm either going to be writing laws about food stamps or I'm going to be on them. So it's a toss-up which way.
Were you a poli-sci major too?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So what then was it about the law aspect of it? Because then you eventually went on to becoming a prosecutor. What was that journey like?
So I absolutely loved criminal law when I was in law school. I loved the professor. I loved the subject matter. I loved just, and her approach to things taking it from, this is what the Constitution says, this is what the law says, and this is how you apply it to a case. And I just found that to be fascinating. So when I was graduating law school, I applied for a job at the district attorney's office in Allegheny County. I initially got hired as, my paycheck said typist, because they didn't have any attorney spots open. So I got to spend about the first 6 months or so in the DA's office as a typist. But really, I was just an assistant working in the homicide unit. So I got to do a lot of their research, helped with discovery. The attorneys that were, prosecuting the homicide cases, they had, just piles and piles and piles of discovery to go through. So I was able to, do that for them and then sit with them at trial and assist in, whatever capacity they needed. So it was a crash course in, homicide cases, and I learned just a ton in those couple of months during my, temporary stint as a typist. And I don't know how to type, for the record.
So what was kind of the end of your journey then with being a prosecutor?
So once an attorney spot opened, I was able to go into the general trial unit. So you're prosecuting basically everything but a homicide.
Okay.
So DUIs, domestic violence cases, assaults, you name it, it came across your desk. So the way that the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office works is it's so big. There are so many cases. You've got all these different municipalities across the county, and there were about 100 attorneys in the office at the time. So you're either in common pleas court or you're in a magisterial court. So the days that I was in the magisterial district courts, you could have close to 100 cases, and they just you come in the morning, and they have all the police reports, and they say, here you go, and that's it, and you just go. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them, you're not obviously going to do a preliminary hearing on 100 cases in a day. That would be crazy. And most of them find a way to, not have the hearing. So people are pleading guilty. Mm-hmm. People are postponing, for some reason. People are negotiating a plea, depending on what the case is. So you do maybe 5 to 10% of those and end up being hearings. When you're at the trial level, kind of the same deal, but less cases, because now it could go to trial. Mm-hmm. You could have 20 cases, come to you in the morning, and you're assigned, either to a particular courtroom or to a group of particular courtrooms. I don't know if that's still how it works. That's how it worked 15 years ago when I was there. And you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants. A lot of times you could open up a file. I had my very first jury trial. One of the DAs who was there, he worked in the violent crimes and firearms unit, and he said, I need to use the restroom. Can you babysit this file for me? I don't think it's getting called up anytime soon. He said, sure, no problem. And he disappears, and the case gets called up almost immediately. And I'm fumbling through. I have no idea. I don't know what the charges are. I don't know what the defendant's name. I know nothing. And I approach the bench, and I'm introduce myself. I'm here on behalf of this other attorney who's just temporarily unavailable, but he'll be right back. Mm-hmm. And she said, the judge, go pick a jury. So that's how I got my first jury trial. Apparently, this person had some stomach issues that day, and he never did return to the courtroom. No. And I went and picked his jury and tried a firearms case.
Did you do a good job?
No, we did not win that case. I think the evidence was actually a little weak. I don't know if all the preparation in the world would have helped. It didn't seem like a great case to begin with, but we Commonwealth lost that one.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, like most government jobs, it's usually trial by fire anyway. So
definitely.
So you also, well, before we move on to that, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the current issue that Allegheny County courts are having with PennDOT. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and your bill to fix that problem?
Sure. So it recently became known that the Allegheny County Court Administration has not been sending notice to PennDOT when if there's a DUI conviction, for example. The court's supposed to tell PennDOT, hey, this person was convicted of a DUI. You need to suspend their license for 12 months or whatever the appropriate suspension is. They just didn't send those notifications in. Not only did they not send them in, they didn't send them in for like 15 years. So we have a couple thousand cases that we know about right now. And this was discovered through an internal audit. But people started receiving notifications from PennDOT that, hey, you need to surrender your license. And it's been, in some cases, 15 years later, after the fact. They even have, we have people calling the district office. I have, friends that are, still in that legal circuit in Pittsburgh that had, come to me with it. And, people were just so confused and so enraged that this is happening. Why wasn't this done so much earlier? So we've actually introduced legislation to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future, because there's nothing in law that says it has to be reported by within a certain date.
Gotcha.
So we're going to do that. It's never needed to be addressed before, because as far as I can tell, this has never been an issue, at least not to this extent, where you're going like more than a decade without notifying PennDOT of the suspension. PennDOT's position is once we're notified, we have to suspend it. So those people are now appealing to PennDOT, which there's a filing fee. They've got to hire an attorney. I mean, it's a whole thing. So we're working to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future.
So if you're dictator of the world and something like this happens, do you think those people who maybe had a DUI 15 years ago and their license was never suspended, do you think that there should be some leniency now that there's been so much time that has passed?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to. I talked to somebody the other day. He's a veteran of the Navy, so I have a soft spot for him. But he he had one DUI, no convictions of anything else. Completely turned his life around. Went to rehab, got sober, has a job now that he has a CDL. He needs the CDL to maintain his employment. And this has been, so many years later, he's going to lose his job if he surrenders his license. So he has no choice but to appeal, because this is, his livelihood now. But we've had a couple of those cases. We have a nurse, who reached out. She's a traveling nurse, obviously needs her license. So this isn't justice served. Like, should their license have been suspended, during the conviction? Yes, absolutely. I mean, they did something wrong, and that's, part of the punishment. And that's, meant to deter people from doing this in the future, because they'll see how difficult it is to not have a driver's license. But because it's been so many years and people are in this completely different, life space, just from the, couple of anecdotal stories that we've gotten, and this is affecting thousands of people. So I absolutely think something should be done. But as far as the law is written, PennDOT is, under obligation to suspend the licenses. So they're going to, have to tell the story to a judge on appeal.
Gotcha. So I also saw that you at one point maybe still are a small business owner. Tell me about that.
I had my own law practice for a while after I left the district attorney's office, hung up my own shingle and did some criminal defense, did some family law, and just general practice areas.
Gotcha. So when was getting now into, I guess, the main topic of discussion of food safety, when was it that you first started actually paying attention to what is in our food?
Mm-hmm. So it wasn't something I had paid attention to until about 4 or 5 years ago. And actually, I was here. I was in Harrisburg. I was just not feeling myself, just feeling kind of crappy. And I started keeping a food diary to see if I could trace it back to anything in particular that I was eating. And I thought for a long while that I was gluten intolerant. And I cut it out. I felt kind of better. Still wasn't 100%. Ended up doing some blood tests, and I didn't have any gluten intolerance. I started, doing, more of the food diary and trying to eliminate things here and there. And during this period, I was researching, what I'm, if I'm eating a particular food, and I'm looking at the ingredients. I don't know what any of these ingredients are, and I think I'm eating healthy. And it turns out I really wasn't. I was doing my body a major disservice by eating things that I thought were healthy, but maybe were, too processed, maybe were too high in sugar, but they're marketed as, healthy food. once I was able to, kind of figure that out and just really eat truly clean, that was when I really started to feel better. And I wanted, more people to be aware of, what's in your food. Hey, did you ever bother to turn that label around? Can you pronounce any of these things? What are they? Are they all made in the lab? Is anything, in there when it says natural flavors, or any of them even natural? And then it turned to, I have 3 kids at home. What on earth am I feeding these kids? And looking in their, lunch boxes and the snacks that I'm buying, and kind of, what everybody else is eating in school. And it's a pretty bad situation that we've got going on here. And we've got obese kids that have fatty liver disease. And fatty liver disease, and it has a new, very technical name that I don't remember. Fatty liver disease used to be the disease for like the old alcoholic man. And now our kids have it. And they don't just have it, they're getting it. It's like almost 1 in 3 of our kids have at least some form of it.
Wow. That's
insane. And this all goes back to what we're eating. So even the foods that you think are healthy, or the foods that are being marketed to our children, specifically ultra-processed foods, they're having a huge impact on our health. And I think that, in light of the federal government not taking any action on any of this stuff for decades, I think it invites the states to step in, and really it's our duty to step in and protect our citizens.
So this seems to be kind of a new issue, though. I mean, you go back to like the 70s and 80s, this didn't really seem to be an issue. What changed?
So in the 70s, obesity rates were around 15% for adults and about 5% for children. Today, we're looking at 40% for adults and at least 20% for children.
Wow.
That's obese. So there's overweight and then there's obese, and the numbers for overweight are much, much higher than that. When you're carrying all that extra weight, it's going to have an impact on your health, and right down to the mitochondria that's powering your cells. So we've got like 37 billion cells in each of our bodies. So when you're attacking the cells, when you're putting, a sugar overload in those cells, you're not going to have a great situation. So it's leading to obesity. It's leading to all of these other related issues. And it's really coming with a $4 trillion price tag that we're spending on chronic preventable diseases in this country year after year after year.
Wow. So what seemed to be that switch? Like, I don't know if you know I don't know how much diets, aside from actually what's in the food, has it really changed that much since the 80s?
Absolutely. If you look at, just take a bottle of Gatorade now versus a bottle of Gatorade in the 80s, so something that I would have had when I was a kid. The ingredients today are about this long. Back, when I was growing up, there were 3. And that's the case with a lot of these, foods. And so I've experienced a lot of reluctance, just with family members that, they say, well, I ate it when I was a kid. Like, it was different. Like, you have to trust me, it was different. And you can find, that information. There's plenty of literature out there to support it. But I will say this, we're, now in this obesity crisis, this crisis of chronic disease, this crisis of, 2/3 of our standard American diet is ultra-processed food. If you turn the clock back 40 years even, and you look at when, some of this, when the tobacco industry, it was coming down with these different cases and these huge billion-dollar settlements, a lot of the scientists that were working for those big tobacco companies went to work for the food industry. So you have Philip Morris. Oh, now they're going to Kraft Heinz, or now they're going to a candy company, and they had a specific task when they were at the tobacco companies. What else can we put in here? Because tobacco's already bad in and of itself. What else can we put in there to make sure people are addicted and they keep coming back to use our product, because that's going to get more profit for their company? Well, they took that same mindset to the food industry. What can we put in here? What can we engineer and put in this and market it and make sure that people keep coming back? So when they say, potato chip, certain potato chip brand, you can't just eat one. You can't just eat one. You have to eat the whole bag because it's engineered to, for your palate to keep wanting more, wanting more, wanting more.
So when people jokingly say, what's in this McDonald's Sprite, are they putting heroin or cocaine or something very addictive in it? they really are. These companies are actually putting addictive substances in our food.
100%. And it's not cocaine or heroin.
Yep.
That's way too expensive. But what they can do is they can create things in a lab setting that end up being low cost, and they can add it to the food, to the drinks, and make sure that we keep coming back.
I'm just going to sit on that one for
Sorry to burst your bubble.
No, that's
it's all true.
So,
it's all very true.
You mentioned something was big food industries, and we hear a lot about big tobacco, big pharma, big tech, the military industrial complex. It seems like big food is kind of the newest spin of that. What is big food? Is it like 3 companies controlling the entire food industry? Like, what's going on here?
So I'm going to highly recommend a documentary for everyone to watch. It's called Food Inc., and there's also a Food Inc. 2. And it really, delves into this monopolistic, system that we've created with our food, with our meat, with our dairy. I mean, we're talking, a handful of companies are controlling everything at this point. And I don't like saying big food. It sounds,
conspiratorial almost.
It does. But there's, a good reason to be conspiratorial about all of this, because this is affecting all of us. And this is affecting our country in a very big way.
So one of the things you mentioned is when we first started was the big coalition that you were able to build around this issue. And this seems to be one of the few issues of actual substance. Because, things have passed out of the House unanimously before, but it's usually like, here's a resolution to say dogs are cute. Yes, everybody votes yes on that. But this is one of the few substantive issues where you have some more of the far-right members of the Republican caucus and co-sponsoring the same legislation that is being co-sponsored by Democrat members from Philadelphia, or even I think there's been a couple members who've co-sponsored this legislation they've called themselves socialists. How did you create such a huge coalition around this movement?
I called them all. I explained the issue and asked people to sign on to the legislation. And I didn't intentionally pick somebody from the far right, somebody from the far left. Those that just kind of came naturally once I was out there talking about the issue. But I had introduced the bills, not this current session, but last session, and it was only 2 bills. There was one bill in there that touched on a handful of chemicals, and one that touched on a handful of these dyes. This session, I wanted to go big, because I felt like I did build this bipartisan coalition. It seemed like, this was something that a lot of people could get on board. And I didn't want to just stop at what I call like the, very low-hanging fruit, where, these dyes or this, certain chemicals. So we actually did 8 bills in the package. And when I was doing it, I didn't want people to just sign on later. I wanted them to own the issue with me. So I did co-prime sponsors on it. So we were introducing it together, and then, continuing to build out on that bipartisan coalition.
So if you can explain, just for people who don't know, what's the difference between a co-sponsorship and a prime sponsorship?
So the prime sponsor that's whose name the bill is in, but you can have multiple prime sponsors, and those sponsors are on prior to the introduction of the legislation. I put a co-sponsor memo out, which if I'm going to do a bill, the very first thing I do is put a co-sponsor memo out. When I put that memo out, 90% of them, it's just, it's just one person. It's just one legislator. Oftentimes you'll see 2. It's rare that you see a handful. It's becoming more commonplace with our, 102 to 101. I think it signals to people that you're serious about this legislation, that you're not, doing something for a political stint.
And by 102, 101, what do you mean by that?
There's 102 Democrats in the House House of Republicans. I wish. There's 102 Democrats in the House of Representatives and 101 Republicans. So the Democrats have a very razor-thin majority right now. So for me, when I see that somebody's gone and gotten somebody from the other side of the aisle, that tells me they're serious, because the Senate is a majority Republican. So you need both to get anything done. So when I was doing this and I wanted these co-prime sponsors, that's when I picked up the phone and started calling people. And I don't think I had anybody tell me no. Everyone wanted to be a part of this. And I cautioned everyone, if I already had a bunch of, members from the left or members from the right, and I'm, talking to the other party, I told everybody, I was, very upfront, these are the other people that are on it. Okay, that's okay, I don't care. Yeah, this is good.
We'll touch on this a little bit later, but I mean, the package itself had 18 sponsors, and it's not very uncommon for you to see a handful of co-sponsors on legislation, sometimes even bipartisan. But I mean, the amounts here on some of these bills, I mean, you have one bill with 45 sponsors and co-sponsors, 23, so more than half of them are Democrats. And it's very impressive to see that much bipartisanship. Was it difficult, did you find, or was it very easy?
No, it wasn't difficult. Once I explained the issue, and I've been working on this for a couple of years now, so I've done individual outreach. I've invited some different advocacy groups, to come to Pennsylvania to visit the Capitol and to do, roundtables and just educate the other members on, what the issues are and what the state could actually do about them. So we had, a good response to, some of those educational sessions. And really, it's just one-on-one. I take, great pride in getting people on these bills because I feel like this is my number one legislative priority is getting, this package done. So if you're co-sponsoring, you are getting a handwritten note from me. You're getting a little piece of organic chocolate. Like, I want you to know that, I'm very grateful for anybody that's bought into this because I think it's that important.
So did you find pushback from Democrats just because of the national talking points right now with RFK and the pushback with RFK, or pushback from Republicans just because of trying to balance that, being pro-small government and this expanding government regulations a little bit? Did you see some of that pushback with these?
Not at all. The pushback I've gotten is from the outside. It's from industry. It's from some of these companies. And they know that, states like Pennsylvania are, lining up really to enact legislation in this realm because it is such a huge problem for this country. And the opposition's all coming from outside of the Capitol.
So you said earlier it was a package of 18 bills, or sorry, eight bills. 8 bills. And I want to go through some of them a little bit here, just the ones that kind of stick out. The first one being Food Chemical Disclosure Law, AKA Show Us Your Science Act. That has 43 sponsors and co-sponsors, 22 being Republican, 21 being Democrat, which requires food products to disclose what are called GRAS, G-R-A-S, generally recognized as safe substances. What are GRAS substances?
So back in 1958, when the original FDA law was written, they had a provision in there called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. And that was intended for, common everyday items like table sugar, vinegar, things that you didn't need to go through rigorous scientific proof to show that these are safe. These are not, lab-made chemicals, right? These are common everyday items that have been around for generations. What happened in the years since, and really, ticked up in the 90s, was food companies exploited this GRAS, and it's now a giant gaping loophole in the law. They exploited it to say, oh, yeah, no, this chemical that we created, no, it's totally safe. It's a voluntary disclosure. So if I'm a food company and I want to introduce, a new product to market with a new ingredient that's never been tested before, I actually don't have to tell the FDA. That is a completely voluntary process because of the way that this GRAS loophole operates. So you would assume you're walking around the grocery store and, you're whatever you're buying. I was always under the assumption that these things have all been tested by somebody somewhere, right? That assumption's not true. It is actually the farthest thing from the truth. Since 2000, 99% of the chemicals that have come to market have come through that GRAS loophole. Just in the last 10 years. So what you can, if you're being honest with the FDA and the people that you're going to, sell this food to, you can go through a petition process with the FDA. Say, hey, I've got this, new thing. I want to introduce it to market. You go through this petition process, and it takes a while, and it's a rigorous process, and the FDA does get involved in testing. And that's why nobody does it. They're all using this loophole to go around it. So there have only been one petition in the last 10 years, and it ended up being withdrawn. And they went and used the grass loophole to get their ingredient onto market. To your earlier point, like, it sounds conspiratorial, and it does. But these are facts. Like, we don't know what we're eating. Mm-hmm. We don't even know how many of these chemicals have come to market. There are some estimates that it's at least 1,000, that we know about. Other estimates, as high as 10,000. Wow. So we don't even have a grasp on how many are out there, let alone how safe any of it is.
Another one is a similar bill that requires disclosure for it is for BHA, which is butylated hydroxyanisole. What is that? I think I nailed it the first time. I'm not going to try to say it again.
Butylated hydroxyanisole. No, say that 10 times fast. It's a dangerous chemical that's in a lot of our foods. This has been banned in other countries. You're talking about endocrine disruption. So we're seeing this increase in or decrease in fertility rates, and an increase in hormonal issues with men and women both. You're seeing this chemical is linked to brain development problems. We've got just a slew of these chemicals that are all kind of attacking the roots of our individual trees, and it's really attacking our cells. And that's leading to inflammation, and it's leading to chronic disease, which we're spending $4 trillion every year in this country on.
Another one that's been making headlines here a lot are the food dyes. And you have a bill that covers that, the Healthy Students Act, which, and I know I'm looking at my notes here a lot, it prohibits the sale of products containing food dyes, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, and green 3 in any public school. What's wrong with it? What's up with these food dyes? What's wrong with those?
So the food dyes, and they're linked to all sorts of behavioral issues, and we know that we've seen this increase in ADHD just in the last decade. The numbers are through the roof, and we're not saying that if your kid eats anything with a dye in it, they're going to have ADHD. There's a correlation there, of course, and there are some studies that are out there that are providing a direct link between dyes and behavioral problems. Other countries have banned them. I mean, we're the guinea pigs as far as the food industry is concerned, because our laws are so lax and so outdated. You have other countries stepping in to protect their citizens and saying, you're not going to sell anything here with these dyes in it, and if you are, you're going to prove to us that it's safe. In this country, much like a criminal defendant, we treat them innocent until proven guilty. We're doing the same with these dyes. We're doing the same with these chemicals. It's only after decades of research comes out and says like, oh yeah, this one's probably should take that off the market. Of course, that's what the FDA did last year with Red 3. That's been 34 years of petitions to get that off the market, and they finally acted 34 years later.
What's the point of these dyes? I mean, they offer no nutritional value.
No nutritional value. It's simply for color. It's simply for color, so
to make it look cool.
To make it look nice, so your kids want to buy it when they're in the store. Because you try to get your kid on something without the dyes. And I buy some things you can get, like Canadian Fruit Loops off of Amazon and things like that. And the colors are less vibrant, of course, and the kids don't want to eat them because they've seen, how nice things can look. But there's no nutritive content whatsoever. It's simply for aesthetic purposes.
Another one here, and you have another bill where it requires labeling of those artificial food dyes as well. Let's see here. The last one I want to talk about here is the banning of paraquat.
Paraquat, yes.
What is paraquat?
Paraquat's a pesticide. It's been banned in almost 90 countries across the globe. It's banned in countries that actually manufacture it, and it's not banned here. We are still spraying it on our crops, and it can be deadly. Even in low doses, it can be deadly, but we're spraying it on our crops. Many of the workers that work in the fields, and they're working very closely with the pesticides, the numbers for their rates of cancer and Parkinson's disease in particular are just astounding. And it's actually a very sad situation that we've exposed. We're exposing the workers to it, and then we're exposing the general population to it, albeit at a much lower dose because they're not working with it every day. But if it's killing people in the fields, it will eventually kill you too.
So out of these 8 bills, which again, for most of them, it seems like you have almost a fifth of the entire House sponsoring or co-sponsoring this legislation with a very even split between both parties. Yet the only one that has made it out of committee was a resolution to recognize August 2025 as National Wellness Month. What's holding these bills up?
I think it's purely political at this point. I mean, there's no reason that we couldn't get some of these bills done, if not all of them, given that, generous bipartisan support.
So the last thing I want to touch on here is recently we've seen 18 states start to put restrictions on SNAP, particularly around whether or not they should be able to be used to buy junk food, which makes a lot of sense when you start looking into it. The number one purchase item on SNAP is soda, and nearly a quarter of all SNAP benefits goes to purchasing junk food. And I think we're one of the few countries where our hungry people, or the people who are considered to be hungry, have higher obesity rates than those who are not. What do you think that is, first and foremost, that correlation between people who are in poverty in America having higher obesity rates, and also do you support any kind of restrictions on SNAP benefits like those?
So a lot going on there. I do think that, first of all, I recognize that there is food insecurity, and it is more pervasive, I think, than most people realize. I actually got an email yesterday from a local food bank, and we're looking at 1 out of 5 kids in the Pittsburgh region that's food insecure. So we've got a very sad situation. Now, what do you do about it? So there's SNAP dollars, of course, that come in, and the SNAP dollars are only going to go so far, right? So you are going to get the population that's reliant on that. They're going to be buying the ultra-processed foods. They're going to be buying sodas. They're going to be buying things that they can get with those SNAP dollars. That makes sense, because they're not going to buy organic produce because it's ridiculously expensive. Like, we're paying more to not be poisoned. So I don't, I'm not faulting those people for those, choices that they're making. I am a proponent of, using these food dollars. We have, a very small amount in the budget that you can take. It's taxpayer dollars, but you can take a portion of it to a farmer's market and buy fresh local produce.
We see a lot of those programs for the elderly.
Correct. So there is a food as medicine movement going on right now, and I think it's been under the radar for a long time. They've been using it in Pennsylvania for medically tailored meals, for instance. For people that have a certain diagnosis, they can get a medically tailored meal. And what we've seen, for a lot of those patients is that when they're getting that food, they happen to come from a food insecure household, they're sharing it. And they're eating, the food that they're not supposed to. So I think we have a crisis in the Commonwealth, and I think it's nationwide as well, that we do have a lot of people that are food insecure. How do we get around that? Banning soda and SNAP, okay, fine. Like, that's low hanging fruit. Should they be having it? No, of course not. My son wanted a soda the other day. There were 73 grams of sugar. It was an orange Fanta, 73 grams of sugar. I mean, you're supposed to get like 20 grams a day, and he's a little kid. He's 9. He's going to get 73 out of this soda. He ended up, I talked about it in the checkout line, but. And that's the exact preventable, chronic disease contributor that we're talking about here. So you could do that. Is it going to be the end all be all? No. I think we need to, look at some of these other programs and look at some of the other reasons that people are food insecure in the first place. Because when you're living, paycheck to paycheck, or you're in a food desert where maybe it's a dollar store that is your, considered your local grocer, it's the place that's nearest you, they're not selling fresh produce. They're selling candy and ultra-processed foods. And if you actually pick up something, ultra-processed food package at a dollar store versus just a regular grocer, the ingredients are actually worse. And it could be the same company, it could be the same product, and you look at the ingredients and there's more additives, and there's more sugar, and there's more chemicals. So those people are going to have a more negative health effect than somebody that's not on SNAP dollars, simply because of all of these other factors going on. So I think there's a lot there. I'm not opposed to getting rid of soda. I don't think it's going to be the big answer that everybody thinks it's going to be, though.
So and I feel like, and this is kind of going outside of the ballpark of what today's topic is, but I feel like as somebody, talking to somebody who used to be a prosecutor, we see a lot of times, we'll take Philadelphia, for example. You have a lot of businesses who, like, whether they're family-owned grocery stores who may have been selling, good products, moving out of the area because of Philadelphia's refusal to prosecute crime, and these businesses just cannot survive because of all the crime that's happening in that city. They're constantly having to deal with theft, or whether it's just their employees have worrying about whether they're going to get jumped, coming in or leaving work. Do you think that there's a correlation with that? Do you think that, starting to actually prosecute crime like it should be is a good solution to decreasing the amount of food deserts in Pennsylvania or the United States in general?
Yeah, even outside of, the food desert issue, if there's a crime, you should prosecute it, right? Like, just on some, very basic level in this country, a crime needs to be prosecuted, and the district attorney is the one responsible for prosecuting those crimes. In the case of Philadelphia, you do have this, situation where the cops aren't, making the arrests that you would see them making in other parts of the states. And then the DA's office, even if there is an arrest made, they're not picking up those cases. And there's, lots that goes into that. There's lots of excuses of, why that's occurring. And I think there's, lots of reasons why that's not occurring. So when you're looking at like a small mom and pop grocer, and we have one where I live, and they're a small grocer, they're already, behind the eight ball. They've got to compete with Giant and Giant Eagle and these large grocery chains and Walmart and, all of these ones that have this, buying power that they don't have. So they're already selling either, they're going to sell at a loss, or they're going to sell their products for more money than these other retailers can. So I think they're already in this bad situation, and now you add in that, they're being, burglarized on the regular, and the cops are turning a blind eye. They've got, expenses to cover, their insurance is going up, all of these things. You can't really blame them for closing up shop and moving out of the city. So I think it's one factor is and it's part of this, system that we've created in this country of, how do we get food to market? We don't not everybody has a local farmer's market. And even when you do, you don't necessarily have access to that, fresh local produce. It could be, I know we have farmer's markets, and there's not a lot of food for sale there. Like, I can't go and get my weekly grocery run, or even, every few days. I can't get it all there. I've got to go to one of these big retailers, and people are in a pinch right now with inflation and everything that's going on with the economy. I think that you're going to see people making choices to move away, even if those mom and pop stores are available. I notice myself, I don't buy certain products from there because it's almost twice as much, and I understand they've got to make their margins, but I've got a household to run too, and we've got to, go to one of the bigger ones to save some money, just like everybody else.
So, and I know I keep saying I'm going to leave with this, but I promised, last question, actually, this time. People my age, I was born in 99. I feel like, I'm sorry.
Oh my God.
I feel like, my generation, I feel like, has been eating these ultra processed foods for our entire life, even if our parents do everything that they can to make sure that we're not eating junk food all the time. Like, my parents weren't feeding me junk food. We weren't going out to McDonald's every day. We ate, my mom or my stepdad would create or cook meals or whatever. I would cook. I thought that I was living a healthy lifestyle as a kid. And then to turn around and figure out, like, no, that stuff that we were still putting into our body had all these things in it. What can someone in my generation, or even generations older than mine, start doing to start reversing course with these harmful substances that we're putting into our bodies?
It's really hard to get away from it. I mean, we are set up for failure in our society. Unfortunately, I've been traveling the last few weeks and spending a lot of time on the road. And if I don't pack a cooler, right, from home, like just and not everybody's going to be able to do this. Like, I've got to, find organic produce. I've got to chop it up myself. I've got to store it. I've got to transport it. If I would just want, something quick, I stop at a 7-Eleven or whatever's available on the road. There is almost nothing in there that I could eat that's going to, be part of that clean, healthy lifestyle. There's almost nothing. And there's thousands of products in there. So it's really hard to break away from it. It's going to take time and it's going to take money, and not everybody has access to one or both of those things. So we're in a situation here where we've made it very difficult to get away from these unhealthy items, and a lot of them are marketed as healthy. So people don't even necessarily realize that they're harming themselves. They think they're doing everything right. That's what I thought I was doing. I'm sure that's what your parents thought that they were doing for you. And it turns out we're being exposed to a cocktail of chemicals every single day.
So if you can't have access to those good products, you said you believe that it's politics playing part in why these bills have yet to make it out of committee. What can the people do at home to try to get these bills across the finish line?
Call House leadership and ask them to run the Health EPA package. Because it's ultimately their decision what comes to the floor, what goes through committee. We've tried to do that specifically on the paraquat bill. We've identified some people living with Parkinson's disease and some family members of those living with Parkinson's disease in districts where the House leaders happen to reside, and have them calling and telling their personal stories to hopefully appeal to their human and not political side. But it's politics, like everything else in this building. It's an uphill battle. Even when you have something that's so common sense, you have something that's so bipartisan, politics always gets in the way of progress.
Representative Natalie Mihalek, thank you very much.
Thank you.